a reasoned, tangible discussion about economic divides because it's quantifiable to some extent. The opposition can reassure regime elites that their material interests will be protected during any transition, right? So you can split the middle on economic issues, but how do you split the middle on ideological or religious issues? And that's where the transitions became very complicated, not just in Egypt, but also in Tunisia, and increasingly now in Libya, where it's very hard for the sides to have a reasonable discussion where they can sit together and actually reach some kind of consensus, because it's almost metaphysical in the sense that we're talking about a lack of consensus over the very nature of the state, of the Egyptian state. What is the purpose of the modern nation state? What is the role of religion in politics? What is the identity of the Egyptian state? And this is the kind of language we heard a lot from secular or liberal elites during the coup and after the coup, that the Muslim Brotherhood was threatening the identity of the state. But it's hard to really grasp what that means in practice. And that's what makes it so difficult. And when I would have discussions with my Egyptian friends, or even relatives for that matter, people who are otherwise intelligent, educated, but they're holding positions which you find very hard to understand as an American, why won't you respect democratic outcomes even if you disagree with them, right? And a lot of it came down not just to what Morsi had done during his 1 year in power, but what he might do in the future. So it was a kind of speculative fear. And it's hard to have a conversation about it because it's about something that hasn't happened yet. So I mean, and we're talking also about people who, for a variety of reasons, some of them legitimate from their standpoint, assumed the worst of their opponents. They assumed the worst of the Brotherhood and said that if we let them stay in power 5-10 years, then we're going to see the nature of the state fundamentally altered. And that's why there was such a discussion in the Egyptian media about Ikhwanat al-Dawla, right? That even though that wasn't really happening at any substantial level, yes, there were political appointments, but nothing that suggested a wholesale takeover of the state. But you see a lot of paranoia about that because again, because of Egypt's history, really since the 1952 revolution or coup, depending on how you see it, is that the state was always at the forefront. Whenever there was a problem, the state was the answer. And I think that Egyptian political parties and elites haven't been able to move beyond that. There's still this obsession over the state, the apparatus of the state, and who can control it. And that makes it a very high-stakes game, and it's a zero-sum battle where it's very hard to have compromise. So this is all to say that I think we were a little bit spoiled by the examples of Latin America and Eastern Europe, that the Arab transitions are actually more comparable to the revolutions of 1848, and before that, the religious wars and conflicts of Europe in the centuries prior. In the sense that it's at the very level of the state, it's a state-building problem. It's not just an issue of differing policies and the role of the state in the economy. We're talking about something at a much deeper level. And we all know how much religion arouses passions. I mean, there's a lot at stake there when people feel that their way of life is going to be threatened. And that goes for both sides. On the right side of the spectrum, Salafis are afraid that if a secular party is in power, their way of life will be fundamentally altered and they're not going to be able to express their religious preferences. But on the other side, liberals fear that they won't be able to live as they're used to living if the Muslim Brotherhood stays in power for any significant period of time. So it affects you on it's intangible in some sense, but it also affects people in a very personal way in terms of how they see their own country. Now, I think that a lot of these things should have been anticipated or understood before the Brotherhood came to power. It's not as if they didn't realize a lot of these things. And that's one of the reasons that the Brotherhood was very ambivalent about power before the Arab Spring started, because they were very well aware of the role of a deep state, the role of liberal elites, and how much of a struggle it would be to change the system. And that's what they would always, that's one of the messages I would always hear. We're not seeking power. We're not ready for power. Society isn't prepared. And that's why when I was thinking about what would be an appropriate title for the book, we came to Temptations of Power, because they knew that power was risky and perhaps even dangerous, but it was also tempting, because the political arena was open to them. The other parties were quite weak. There was a political vacuum, and it was tempting. And there's a variety of reasons that they decided to run a presidential candidate, and some of them were legitimate, some of them were less so. But they did succumb to the temptations of power. And I think understanding how the Brotherhood relates to power is very important and will be important going forward. And I'll get to some of these issues of how the Brotherhood is, or some elements of the Brotherhood are revising their approach to politics after the coup. Now, so with that in mind, let me just fast forward to the time of the coup, and then we'll get to post-coup. And kind of look at where things go from here. So I was in Rabat a couple days before the massacre on August 14th happened, and I spent some time there with not just Brotherhood but also Salafi activists and youth activists who were not necessarily part of a specific party. And it was really interesting because that was, as some of you might recall, there was a lot of discussion in the days leading up to August 14th, and it was always this speculation: when is the dispersal? When is the military going to move in? And there would always be rumors. Oh, we're hearing it's happening this morning, but then it wouldn't happen. So it was a very tense time, and so I was in Rabat then, and I remember I had a very interesting meeting with Assam Ariane on one of the days I was there, and I hadn't seen him for quite some time, and he comes down to meet me, and we were in the Rabat Media Center, and I was just kind of sitting waiting for him, and he comes down, and honestly, I've never seen him so calm and comfortable in my life, and I've known him since 2005 and meeting with him pretty regularly. What was really surprising to me, he was smiling a lot, and he was calm, he was comfortable, and he was very underdressed. He was wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants. So just like very chill, right? And that was interesting to me. And in a kind of similar way too, I met with Jihad al-Haddad, one of the younger Muslim Brotherhood officials who some of you might know, and obviously all these people are in prison now. He told, and again, he was surprisingly optimistic in the days leading up to August 14th, and he and others kept on using this rhetoric of essentially preparing themselves to die if that's what was necessary. And I tried to kind of understand this mindset, and Jihad told me that he was very much at peace, and he's never felt so much at peace as he did then. Now, this was all interesting to me, and it suggested that the Brotherhood was almost more comfortable in a state of opposition, that after the coup, they were returning to a purer state, and there was this language of purity and purification. And this was one of the ways that Brotherhood officials talked about the coup afterwards. Yeah, it's bad, but at least we'll have a purification process because we'll know who are the real patriots or Democrats or whatever it happens to be. So you hear a lot of this kind of language of purity, and it's kind of an existential battle between good and evil, if you will. And it's almost as if their 1 year in power was a historical aberration, and this is where they were more comfortable. Granted, they didn't know that the massacre would be as bad. So they said that, we're prepared to die and all of that, whatever, but I don't think they fully appropriated the idea. Like, it's one thing to say that you're ready to die, but when 600 people, more than 600 people are killed in mere hours in one day, that's not something that you can really conceptualize until it happens. So I think they were very struck by